hard to realize that there was the same process of awakening to the ecological crisis was basically the same process as awakening to social justice issues. You can look at any large-scale pattern of social justice oppression, and it's always linked to ecological issues, and it's always about the taking of resources.
The Urban Exodus podcast shares the wisdom, wit, and stories of those who decided to embark on the road less traveled to pursue their own interpretation of the good life. Small business owners, change makers, artists, farmers, and more, working towards building a better future for themselves and their fellow citizens. The people I've met through this project give me energy and hope for a better future. May their inspirational words and practical advice embolden and guide you on your own journey. This podcast is for country dreamers, rural folk, and urban dwellers alike who want to feel more connected to the natural world and the purpose and choices in their lives. I'm Melissa Hessler. Welcome to the Urban Exodus. Urban Exodus is a labor of love and is only made possible by listener support. To support our programming, please consider making a listener contribution or joining our Patreon community for access to bonus features, rapid-fire interviews, videos, and so much more. I'm excited to invite you to my conversation with Dr. Jeanine Canty. Jeanine is a professor within the Transformative Studies Doctoral program at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. She teaches from her home located in the rural expanses outside Boulder, Colorado. Her teaching examines issues of social and ecological justice connected to the process of worldview expansion. Through her research and writing, Jeanine links the oppression of peoples and the earth together and discusses how we can expand our worldviews so that we can be more aware, resilient, and change our philosophies when it comes to interacting with the natural world and with one another. Her forthcoming book, Returning the Self to Nature, Undoing Our Collective Narcissism and Healing Our Planet, will be released in September of this year. In our conversation today, we speak about the effects of cultural narcissism, our current mental health crisis, how to recreate a sense of belonging with the natural world, breaking our Western worldviews, the interconnectedness of all beings, rethinking our approach to the climate crisis, and how we can shift to a more ecologically minded paradigm. This is a story about healing, prioritizing joy and connection, the power of compassion and empathy, and choosing to imagine and work towards a brighter tomorrow. So I am absolutely thrilled to have on the podcast today Jeanine M. Canty, PhD, and it's just such an honor to have you on the show, for you to share your wisdom and research with all of us. I was turned on to your work by my friend Allison Morgan, who had taken a course with you, and she was so impacted by your work and your words. And as soon as she told me about you, I just started digging, and everything that you have written about and have said just feels so true to me. And so I just want to spread your wisdom to as many people as possible so we start moving ourselves in the right direction. So welcome. And first off, I'd love if you'd share a little bit of your personal backstory, where you grew up and the paths that you've taken that have led you to where you are now.
Thank you so much for hosting me on we were just talking about how inspiring your podcast is. So I feel really fortunate to be included. Yeah, I just want to acknowledge, you mentioned that I live in the foothills of Boulder, Colorado, and it's traditional lands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute peoples. Yeah, so I was actually born in the Bronx in New York City. I was born in the 70s, and it was right after, in 1968 was the Equal Housing Amendment, which opened up a lot of segregated areas to people of color to be able to purchase homes. So my parents went along that pathway and decided to integrate a segregated community in New New Jersey. And so, at age under one, we moved into the suburbs of New Jersey. And I was always part of kind of the New York City community living in the outskirts. And so I had a kind of deep taste of the suburbs, and where we lived was a newer community. So we were also on the edge of some undeveloped areas as well. So I wrote about this recently, just noticing the first time that I stepped out of our very structured, linear plan community with my brother and some of his friends, and we stumbled on a kind of wild creek area, and I just felt the difference. And I just really noticed how everything was alive and more chaotic and flowing, and just that place really drew me in. And so at that point, I just was always drawn to wild places. And we got to go on different vacations, whether to, the Catskills or to the beach. Later, we lived closer to a nature preserve. So my dad would take us hiking. And I just was always drawn to wilder places, and also spent lots of time in cities and suburbs. And so that's a little bit of my kind of relationship with early places. And in terms of my story, identify as African American, Black, also really embrace kind of my multicultural mixed race heritage, which straddles a lot of different lineages, which I won't go deeply into. But I had a lot of really disorienting experiences, particularly as a child in a non-diverse community that had a lot of racism in it, and just really struck of what it felt like to not only be othered, but to notice kind of the ignorance of both adults and younger people in my community, and really holding a lot of questions of why is this happening, and also encountering a lot of really good people that had a lot of compassion and made connections to see me, and vice versa. So just having that, I guess, duality of feeling that deep sense of pain from alienation, and also a deep sense of connection with other humans and also the natural world. And so that always planted a seed in the journey that unfolded for me. But I actually, after graduating high school, entered a program studying international relations. And I really thought, naive self thought it was going to be more about peace studies, but I really got the kind of ins and outs of economics and Western economics, politics, history, just kind of a scope of the things you need to understand about corporate globalization and war, and kind of our trajectory with that. While I was studying multicultural education, I also stumbled onto the field of ecopscyhology and ended up taking a course in that. And it just opened up my reality, and kind of pairing multicultural education and ecopsychology for me just provided kind of the answers to so many of the questions that I was holding.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your teaching in transformative studies, and maybe, because I'm sure for a lot of people, ecopsychology is a new term for them. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about ecopsychology.
A lot of it is really based on transformative learning theory, which is looking at how adults change and expand their worldviews. And so that's where so many of my passions lie, particularly with both social justice and ecological issues. Early on, as I was telling you, I was studying both ecopsychology and multicultural education, I realized that there was the same process of awakening to the ecological crisis was basically the same process as awakening to social justice issues. And also I realized that you can look at any large-scale pattern of social justice oppression, and it's always linked to ecological issues, and it's always about the taking of resources. So with transformative learning, really we all inhabit a worldview, and most of us think our worldview is pretty like right and makes sense. Yet we're so conditioned by others and other circumstances. And so a worldview has two dimensions, and one is a habit of mind, and the second is a resulting behaviors, resulting actions. And so the habit of mind is all of the conditionings that we've been given, such as our gender expression and sexuality, maybe our political influences, religion, our economic status, our education, so many different things that we didn't necessarily choose, but we were born into and then get more conditioning over. And then our resulting actions is a resulting point of view is actually how we play out our worldview. And so with transformative learning, so much of it is having the work I do is often around these disorienting dilemmas, a classic term in transformative learning. Some people call them critical incidents, of where we kind of have these blowouts, these experiences that we can't integrate in our current worldview. So we either have to open up and expand and examine and reflect on what that's about, or we need to repackage that experience so it already fits into our current worldview, which creates some very irrational thinking if we have to bound it that way to restory it to fit into a closed worldview. And so the goal with transformative learning, one of the goals is to make our worldviews most open to new experiences and actually change to meet that, expand, and hopefully in service to the larger whole. And so ecopscyhology is really looking at how the disconnection, humans, particularly humans of Western civilization, and I would say really anyone that's operating under a corporate globalized paradigm, we've disconnected our identities with the rest of nature. And so that results in the destruction of ecosystems because we don't feel that deep connection. And so we have this power over, and it's also resulting in our own both personal and collective pathologies. And the framing that I often use with ecopscyhology is it has 4 assumptions. And the first is that the planet is calling for healing. And with the climate crisis, we know that's really true. We can go over all the kind of statistics and phenomenon of what's happening within Earth, within all of our realities. And planet is definitely calling for healing. And then the second assumption within that is that people are calling for healing. And often we don't notice that as deeply, or some people notice that even more deeply. We have so many folks that are feeling anger or alienation, depression, looking at how many people are suffering from addictions, whether it's alcohol or drugs or codependent relationships, techno addictions. We can't get off of our phones or television or any form of media. Then there's just so many. Consumerism is a huge one, just buying things. It's kind of the water that we're swimming in. And then we have so many things from mass shootings with young people, just so many different personal and collective pathologies. And then the third assumption is that the planet calling for healing and people calling for healing, these are not separate. They're totally intertwined and interrelated. And then the fourth assumption, which I've already mentioned, is that this basically seeing that it's an illness, a pathology, and this pathology is really rooted in the kind of culture of Western civilization or any society that's operating under a corporate globalized paradigm, which unfortunately now is most societies.
I mean, going back to transformative studies, we have lived through the last 2 years. In some points of time, I felt very hopeful that there would be this kind of collective awakening, because all of a sudden people they didn't have as many distractions. We all had to slow down. There was like almost a collective near-death experience to a certain degree as well, because there was so much fear and uncertainty. It was interesting when you said, the two ways of like opening your mind and then closing it and just like repackaging it with all of the baggage that you have. And I wondered, for anyone that might be listening, ways that they can work on opening their mind and changing their mind and not letting how they grew up or the things that have been put into their life dictate so much of how they feel or believe about situations.
That is a great question. Asking questions is a huge piece. Within our Western kind of reality, we often don't feel comfortable with not knowing. And so we're conditioned to always have like the right answer and to state what we believe. And often it's really binary. Like you're either this or this, this or this. And so when we start getting glimpses of, hey, this experience isn't fitting into the right or wrong boxes, often we want to like close that loop so we feel comfortable. But a lot of it is actually being able to sit with not knowing, to sit with feeling uncomfortable, whether it's like this sense of feeling like itchy or maybe like a little bit of like pain, disorientation is coming up, and getting comfortable with inhabiting our bodies and our emotions around it. But one of my favorite books is called My Name is Cellist, and I'm in recovery from Western civilization. And the author, who's a psychotherapist or psychologist, talks about the original trauma, which is a whole big thing. And ecopscyhology really looks at that, of like how we became disconnected. But she goes back deeper to, what are the qualities of like a healthy, whole person who's earth-centered, earth-based person. And so that's called the primal matrix. And the first quality is a sense of belonging. And so belonging to place, to community, this kind of comfort with being in our bodies, our sensory worlds. It's like, right, like feeling at home. And most of us are kind of like skittish because we're so reactive to our outward environments, our outward conditionings, making sure we have things right, that we don't necessarily just feel at ease with ourselves and with others, with nature. And so once we can start letting these conditionings kind of fall and see what's really true, all of these qualities come back. And the second quality that she talks about is this kind of a unique sense of self. And with so many wisdom's traditions, there's this idea that we're born into the world with a gift to give to the world, and also with a gift to receive from the world. In fact, so many gifts to receive from the world. And in our society, we're often conditioned to like you should become a banker or lawyer, some sort of profession that's going to give you some economic security and get the best grades so you can be a doctor or whatever it is, instead of being raised in a way that brings out what your unique purpose is, your unique gift. And often if it's a gift that's not necessarily tied to a big paycheck, but it brings about some sort of really great healing or service to the larger community. So many of us are stifled and, are working that 9 to 5, 40 to 60 hour work weeks and, doing these things that like, who came up with this plan? Not me. And then the third and last quality of that primal matrix is non-ordinary experiences. I think they're just the most mundane experiences that are really beautiful. They're those things that just make us say, wow. And there are things that don't cost, money. And a lot of them are nature experiences, or the beauty of sipping a nice cup of tea, or laughing with a loved one, seeing a beautiful bird fly by, or, just those really special yet really sacred experiences. So many of us have kind of forgotten to tap into those and realize that that's actually our big bank account, these potentials, which are here in every single moment. And we start extending this to not only like one being, but hopefully becoming at home to the places that we inhabit, our bioregions, and being curious about, what's going on here, who are the beings that live here, what are the seasons like, where does the water come from, what's happening with the air and the soil, and just really becoming at home. We realize that right now there's such a huge wave of people suffering, and also people asking deeper and bigger questions. What's the right way to live, and how do I want to step out into this world? And as we connect with others, we realize that we're not alone, and we have all of these community members. And it's not that we have a group think that we're all the same, but we develop our compassion and our understanding towards others. We're going to keep becoming a different person as well.
You're always growing. You're always questioning. You're never putting boundaries on yourself, and you're trying to absorb all of these different experiences that maybe you were closed off to before. And I think that, the way that our systems have been created, we talked about this a little bit, they've been intentionally created to separate people from nature, from one another. I feel like it's a privilege to do the work that I do. And the only reason I was able to start this project was because I had a safety net all of a sudden pop up underneath me that allowed me to ask myself what I wanted to do, versus before working in the tech world. And it didn't feed me, and it felt horrible. And I would sit in these meetings and be hearing them talk about engineered obsolescence and just being like, this is just the worst thing ever. Why am I here? I didn't see any other pathways because I had to provide for myself. And there are all these pressures that we put on ourselves in Western society. How do we abandon those pressures? And what advice would you give to people who don't have a safety net on ways that they can maybe start working towards building a different type of reality for themselves?
Yeah, gosh, that's a huge question.
It's a big question.
And, there's something about setting intentions of what we want to be doing. And sometimes it's just like the smallest pieces of like the pathway, the direction that we're moving to, and still knowing we're not sure what's going to unfold with that. Because if we set these like crazy lofty goals, but have no, steps to get there, we can easily become disappointed. So I think there is something about, probably like what you've been doing with your work, you said 10 years of, it takes a long time to really build something and flourish and get that expertise. And I still do definitely believe in you need 10,000 hours and something to be good. And I don't know if that's the true quantifiable amount, but that we actually have to do the hard work of not only like the economic, educational, career goal part, but the hard work of changing our actual practices and behaviors. So we're not living what a lot of people would call a double life, that we actually have to really mirror what our domestic and our inner life and our life with community towards what we're trying to create.
I mean, honestly, I've seen that in a lot of stories that I found of people who have made big changes in their lives. It's about stating it out loud. What is it that I feel? Try to tune into that inner voice. And then by stating it out loud, all of a sudden you develop all of these allies and people that can help you realize that dream or help you stay on track, or you can talk with them through things. And I really think it is possible for anybody to have that journey, regardless of their current life or situation, because it's coming into the self, but then also coming into the natural world, right? It's kind of the balance of the two.
We're alive beings, so fortunate to have a life in a very sentient, alive world that has a greater intelligence than any human, in fact, all humans collectively. But when we can learn how to attend and tap into that wisdom and guidance, and we get aligned and we suddenly get helpers from areas that we would never expect. And then we also, our kind of intelligence and wisdom is coming from something that's so much greater.
One of the terms in your newest book that's about to come out that particularly resonated with me was this concept of ecological narcissism. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I appreciated you saying the title of the book in the beginning, because it's coming out in September, but it's all written, and it's called Returning the Self to Nature, Undoing Our Collective Narcissism and Healing Our Planet. I'm still learning the title. But yeah, I can kind of laugh at the title, but it's a pretty heavy topic, which, try to really be able to hold with a lot of different practices to work with the heaviness. But really looking at, in our society right now, we have such a kind of fixation on narcissists and how there's, just these really incredibly self-centered, destructive people in our society. For those of us who've had encountered with narcissists, it's really alarming and painful. Yet there's something about the way we kind of demonize narcissists as being these just these personal pathologies and these really bad characters, and usually a therapist, a psychologist would say, if you're in a relationship with a harmful narcissist, the only way to get out of the situation is to break ties completely. Yet when you do that, that narcissist is basically passed on to someone else, because they'll find their next kind of victim, their next resource to feed off of. And then if we actually look deeper at it, we're living in a society that's particularly Western culture. And again, I always modify that by anyone living under a corporate globalized reality, where we've been conditioned to be so self-centered. In Western reality, the individual is the unit of currency. And it's always about, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you can have this, particularly in the US, and this concept of the American dream, you can have unlimited success and riches, but it's always in a kind of competitive model versus others, that you're climbing this ladder and others are going to be on the chain, because we're based on hierarchy, and particularly economic hierarchy that also gets disseminated by race and class and gender and abilities and so many different factors. And so we're living in a society that's so self-centered. How do I look? Do I have the right job, the right career? Do I have the right body type? Do I have the right group of friends? How do people see me? Do I have, what is my Facebook post, likes about, and on and on. And, do I have the right car and the right house and all of these different things? And so we're always looking outward on how people see us and measuring. And so it's a constant competition. And that is really a marketplace reality with our economic system, because corporations increase their profits when people feel highly insecure and need to keep purchasing things and experiences to make themselves feel better. And so everyone wants to be this extraordinary, bright star. We're all the star of our reality TV show. Do you follow me? Do you blah, blah? Do you know what I'm doing now? And so we're like a whole community, a society of highly narcissistic people. And then when we look at that, we're also in and there's so many different traits around what a narcissist is. And there's clear distinctions that there is healthy narcissism, like everyone should have a healthy sense of self, but then there's there's a scale of narcissism. And so it's only when we're on Craig Malkin talks about like the scale, and there's the extreme narcissism, and there's extreme narcissism, and then there's an actual diagnosis called narcissistic personality disorder that it's really hard to diagnose, and you can't diagnose this unless you're a licensed psychologist, therapist, and even then it's very hard to diagnose. But if we look at the narcissistic meme, when we're so self-centered, we actually lack the compassion of being able to attend to other people, and also even so important and as important to attend to what's going on with Earth and how we're destroying ecological systems at such a rapid rate. It's almost irreversible, or people would say it's totally irreversible at this point. And so when we're looking at this collective narcissism, it's really important to just kind of wake up to this reality and to, again, see what's going on and to change that with our actions. All of this is underscored by really insecure, ungrounded self that is constantly trying to consume all of these different experiences to feel good about itself, but basically forsaking all other beings as part of that.
I just wanted to give an enormous thank you to all of the listeners who have made contributions towards the production of this podcast. Every season, I spend about 100 hours preparing, writing, editing, interviewing, sketching, distributing, and I have hard costs for my editor and hosting fees. It means so much to me that you find enough value and meaning in this work to pledge your support to keep it going. If you haven't had a chance to contribute, we've made it really easy. Just click the support button on the top of urbanexodus.com and pledge any amount that you like. Or join the Urban Exodus Patreon community. Thank you again. I feel so lucky to be a part of the amazing global community that this project has manifested. You know, it's hard to even like turn on the television anymore because it just feels like it's just people like yelling at each other and people being caricaturized as things. And it's all distractions in addition to these like deep insecurities that you're saying and deep fears. I mean, because I think that everybody, if they really tap into themselves, has some fear for the future right now. Even if you don't believe in the climate crisis, like there is a deep-rooted fear that collectively every person probably feels, but it's much easier to be distracted by television or your phones or how many people like you or buying these things. And like marketing has been so successful in tapping in, and also just like technology, quite honestly, technology has been used as this tool, this algorithm to like know when you're feeling certain ways and then put the right thing in front of you to buy. And I wondered, from your perspective, you've done so much research on ancient civilizations and modern civilizations. If you thought that there was a role that technology could play in the future that could heal versus harm.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Gosh, that's another big question. And actually, yeah, there's so many dimensions. A really wise elder who recently passed away, I believe in December, Malidome Some, he would actually talk about or write about spiritual technologies as well. And so that's a whole other piece that often we forget, that besides like kind of more of these linear technologies or things you can touch and see the plans for, we forget that we actually have a whole bunch of other technologies that aren't even factored into possibilities for ecological healing. And so we don't have to talk about those, but I just want to note that. And then one of my deepest kind of teachers, mentors, inspirers, Joanna Macy, writes a lot about this great churning, as well as David Corton and others. And she talks about these three areas of the Great Turning. And the Great Turning is really looking at this kind of new ecological paradigm that so many of us are stepping into right now. And she talks about, and so it's really a breaking away of what would be called the kind of business as usual model, and like stepping into a new lifestyle, a new reality, which I think so many people with this urban exodus or urban habitation, greening, all of this. And so let me see if I can remember all three of the areas. Well, one is holding actions in defense of the earth. So really just saying no to like the business as usual, to the corporate marketplace, to, the 9-to-5 job that's, soulless, all of those, to the deforestation that's happening in our neighborhood, whatever, fracking, all of those things, saying, no, I'm not doing that. And then the second, which I really applies to the question that she asks, is shifting to these different technological solutions, and whether it is about, the simple parts of reducing our ecological footprints, folks who can afford to move into hybrids and, the electric vehicles or no vehicle, using your bike, using public transportation. So many of us have shifted to working at home and really reducing our ecological footprints in that way, really looking at our imprints of our resources. And so there's like all the personal things. And then there's so many things going on with larger planning, whether it's cities making structures with public transportation, with ecological footprints, with greenhouse gases, making those commitments and actually putting investments so those things can change. I am a strong proponent of localization. There's so many different technologies coming out, and that can be used, even like the simple processes of purifying water that aren't available globally with UV, and that, people who have like poor sources of water and are getting sick from it. And there's actually the almost free technology to do that. There's a lot of people that say everything we need has already been invented, creative. We actually just need to distribute it. And also people need to dig deep with those technologies in the communities they live, because it's, again, never going to be a blanket solution. It's also going to depend on what are the resources available in one's community. And I did just want to mention that last dimension of the great churnings, in case anyone's like, what's that third part? Then that one is kind of where I'm most vested, and that's all about changes in paradigms and how we actually shift to a more new ecological paradigm.
Well, speaking of the shift to a new ecological paradigm, because that's a big shift that is going to need to happen. I mean, it will probably happen in our lifetimes in some regards. Like, we're already seeing those shifts now. I'd love for you to share your vision for what that future paradigm shift, what that world would look like.
Yeah, that's someone asked me a similar question. And one of the things that I love is that this whole shifting is that everyone gets to have a different vision, and we also get to interlock our visions. So one of the things I'm so excited about is participating in other people's and other entities and other places' visions. One thing that I truly believe, and I mean, there's just such a huge wave of people reinforcing this with their practices and their works, their institutions, their communities, is the future is all about the collective, that we're shifting from me to we. What's great about that, because it breaks that Western paradigm that happens when we're trying to devise these ecological solutions, is that I don't have to be like the hero that's gonna be like, dun, 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 I have the solution. I can actually attend and listen to other people's ideas, participate in other people's projects, get wisdom, ideas, creativity, and co-create with others. And so it's not only like, oh God, this, responsibility is off my shoulder, but oh my gosh, this is like really fun in a lot of ways because we're like doing something. And it's also really hard work because suddenly we're coming into, I think so much of the vision I'm seeing is these unusual couplings that suddenly, if we're talking about the we, that means we're not, there's this book, Bowling Alone, by Grant Putnam, and he talks about how generations before us, like our parents and our grandparents they were like interacting often with people that had like different political and religious identities. But now with our generations, the last, couple of days, we can like handpick. We're just going to hang out with people who have the same values of us. But that's not how change works. We actually have to have these unusual couplings so we can get into like the edges and like the kind of conflicts and it's not about winning a debate, but then how do we actually attend to this work? Like the future is collective means that everyone is needed and we're not going to move it. My vision includes everyone, even those people that are now being othered and trying to be pushed out of the picture because we don't want to hear their voices. And those voices are still important. And the transformation, I love Starhawk has this book, The Fifth Sacred Thing. It's a fiction book. It's just so great. And she has another version of that, a newer one, the next iteration called The City of Refuge. But one of the themes of that is that there's a place at the table for you if you'll join us. And so it's saying that these changes include everyone, not just people with your same race or your same gender, your same political identity. It needs to be most everyone for us to actually be able to really make these changes. So, my vision of the future includes these unusual couplings, particularly at our community level and across institutions and all of these different ideas and projects and just showing up and seeing what this kind of strange pot brews and mixes, and of course listening to our bioregions and all of those beings within our bioregions for guidance and really shifting into the practice of not just thinking about me and what do I need, but moving out from like what do the people around me need, what is my community, what are the beings. Joanna talks about these, Maisie talks about these widening circles. So we start to really leave this individual ego-centered vision and really constantly asking, like, how can I be of service? How can I attend? How can I connect? How can I be creative? And then equally important, how can I be grounded? How can I be well-nourished? How can I resource my inner life so I have the energy and resources to attend? I'm never going to be, nor do I want to be one of those people that's constantly burned out because they have too many things going on. Again, that heroine that's, I'm going to, attend to every fire and create these massive projects. And some people can do that, but I can't. And I feel like it's so important to tap into the joys of life and what makes life great, because otherwise, what are we trying to preserve if we're not creating beautiful realities? Like our ancestors on Earth want us to attend to what's going on, but they also want us to have like joy and community and beauty and to create more beauty in the world.
I mean, everything that you just said resonated with me so much because I think that there is this real feeling of urgency, and also just there's so many fires that, like, how do you put out all the fires? And then what it does is it's paralysis. Like, people just feel like they can't do anything. And I think it's really tapping into, what you can do maybe from a local level, maybe what you can do wider, those broadening circles. I think that's beautiful. I also think there used to be so much more of a sense of community. We're living in such a divisive time right now. And like you were saying, this cherry picking of these kind of like homogenized groups of echo chambers that we build for ourselves that feel comfortable and safe. I think because we have been so homogenized and our systems have really broken us apart from one another intentionally to, maintain capitalism, consumerism, all of these different structures that we live within. The best thing that we can do to dismantle it is like see people where they're at and connect with them and maybe give them a different lived experience than what they have had in their bubble. And that is easier said than done sometimes. Yeah. And there are certainly people that are not safe to interact with in those ways, but I don't know, maybe it's just a general optimism that I have that more people are good out there than bad. At least I have to tell myself that.
Yeah. And to remember that, like, even folks, to a certain bounded way that have like, the curmudgeon or who has the values that you don't agree with, a lot of that comes about through wounding and disconnection. So as you can offer a little opportunity for connection, that person's reality is changed as well. And yeah, I definitely don't start with like the most scary, like there's folks that I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing that. There's this author, Donna Haraway, and she's got a book, Staying with the Trouble. I just love that. I mean, book's interesting read, hard read, but it's also the practice of actually, we have to attend and stay with these, like, all of this kind of trouble. We can't just shut the door because we don't like one aspect or even a lot of it. We have to stay with the annoying conflicts, the itchy uncomfortability of it, because it is coupled with all this joy and positive aspects as well. And the more we invest, the more that transforms.
Your second book really explored globalization and localization. And globalization is kind of this new term. This is like this new reality that we see for ourselves. It's basically like we've extended capitalism all over, and now anything that we want, we can have whenever we want it. Supply chains, we're starting to see how fragile those systems are and exploitive, obviously. I'd love for you to talk about the compare and contrast globalization to localization. And then localization, to me, feels really achievable on a small scale, but maybe a little bit difficult to get on a larger community. And I wondered if you had any examples of small communities or large communities that are successfully working towards localization that people could use as inspiration.
Yeah, and my second book, I actually have it right over here. It's called, another books always have long titles, but it's called Globalization, Globalism and Localization, Emergent Approaches to Ecological and Social Crises. And it's a collection of different authors that who really, I was really seeding the question of what is kind of the balance, or, is it one or the other, of whether we should be focusing on our localized communities, what is going on with corporate globalization. I mean, I know what's going on, but the term globalism is really focusing on the actual positive part of globalization. And a lot of that is looking at these various movements that are going on and some examples of best practices. And so for folks that aren't familiar with corporate globalization, it really is the water that we're swimming in. We've moved, as you're saying, we've moved away from kind of our national identities to where we've basically pledged allegiance to mega corporations that are controlling our water, so many of the resources of Earth, how we spend our dollars. And so many of us, instead of investing our dollars in our local communities, which is another tie that binds us to our community, is actually, it's if you live in a community where there's just, I always give the example, there's just one guy that comes and brings your propane, which if you live in a cold climate or if you cook, you need it. So if you piss off the propane driver and you can't survive. And so, but now we have so many folks that they order online and something gets, dropped in front of their door in an hour or whatever, or they don't even mend their shoes and their clothes. They just, throw them away or maybe recycle them and sell them, but they buy new stuff constantly that we're actually not funding the dollars into our communities. And so corporate globalization is really this mindset, again, of constantly making more money to establish profit lines for the corporate shareholders. In order to be a successful corporation, you always have to have more profit each year.
Exponential
so you're
growth.
Constantly exponential growth, which it just doesn't
make sense.
The equation, it means that you're always going to have to exploit others in order to have more profit, because that profit is always based off of scarce resources such as trees or clean water or precious minerals, oil, all of these different things that are finite. They're not in the solar renewable budget. Same thing with the labor of peoples. And so the more we participate in this outsourcing, the more those resources get exploited. Even when we think about transportation costs of getting all of these things sent to us from other communities, what foods are we eating, and do they actually grow within our bioregions or even in our state or tri-state area? And if not, should we be eating those things? And could we even survive? So starting to decouple our relationships with our consumption habits and then investing in our local communities. I get really inspired by the founder of Deep Ecology, Arne Næss, a Norwegian philosopher and environmental activist, would write about these 10 properties of green communities. And I don't remember them all off the top of my head, but some of it was that you can they're small enough that you can bike from one end to another, walk from one end to another, just all of these different things. But we start educating people for what's actually needed there instead of looking for, a global marketplace job where you're moving around bank accounts or, whatever you might be doing. And that there'll still be institutional needs on the global level, like, legal systems, medical care. But there's other advances that you might want to take into consideration, education. There's, certain things that you want to look at the global also patterns of social movements and all of these different things.
It is about, where you are, tuning into the people around you, finding the solutions that fit from a local level. I think this idea of food is so crazy. If you just look at food alone, it's really wild. I mean, I remember one of the most transformational books that I ever read when I was younger was Barbara Kingsolver's Animal Vegetable Miracle. And it was just talking about the footprint of food. And it was something that in our modern society, we don't even think about it. I eat bananas all the time and they're cheap and you get them in Maine but you have to think about the journey and and is this appropriate to be eating a banana and should we be eating avocados?
Definitely. Well, there's one other piece to that I wanted to name in terms of when we have all of these localized communities and that vision that we actually need the majority of the world to shift. We have to tip over so it's the majority, or else the we were talking about this dominant kind of almost a rushing river of corporate globalization. It's really hard to swim upstream, but if we have the majority of swimming upstream, suddenly the pace is totally different and the river slows and it gives the accessibility. And so it actually, especially if you're a small community living enclosed by a dominator society, even if you have the most sacred wellness principles and actions, you will still be engulfed by the dominator society. We saw this very clearly with genocide and colonization of Native American communities in the US, but that happens worldwide. So it really is this collective effort of we need the majority of communities to be making the shift.
And it just adds a level of resiliency that helps with a lot of that anxiety and fear that people are feeling right now. Because if you feel like, I know my neighbors, our community is strong, we have food here, we have the basic human essentials that we need, then we can face whatever's ahead. And that's what we all need. I wondered, what are some of your personal practices that help you stay rooted and connected to the earth?
Yeah, I mean, I have, I laugh because I often talk about, well, the need for both self-care and so many of the social justice folks, particularly Audre Lorde, but so many folks talk about this idea of community care on the personal level, straddling into the latter. My practices, and I live in like Boulder, Colorado, which I would say is like the self-care capital of the US. And so I've been a yogi for over 2 decades. And same thing, I've been a meditator for over 2 decades. And so those are really important practices for me in terms of, I have a lot of, frenetic energy, and I need to move my body a lot. And so I get a lot of exercise. And also I need to just kind of have grounding and clearing. And I really believe that when you do any sort of contemplative mindfulness practice, whether it's meditation or walking in the woods or, just looking at the stars at night or whatever it is, you actually create more time. So we have all these people that, spend so much time being all, putting out fires and stress and no. But if you actually put more time into being able to show up and in an authentic, grounded presence, everything you do becomes so well, thoroughly done because it takes less time and energy to do it because you're just showing in full force. And so I spend a lot of time in nature, and, I'm not like out there conquering nature and, or, doing a marathon running or anything like that, but just like appreciative time in nature. I love gardening. I love growing food, and, anyone who grows and tries to eat off of their garden, and you're talking about the bananas and avocados, and we realize like, it's actually really hard to grow enough food to like eat. And, if I can eat food for lunch and dinner that includes elements of my garden all summer, I feel pretty good.
It has been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, Jeanine. I am like lifted. I just feel you are a magic human being. I want to spread your wisdom and knowledge with as many people as I possibly can. Also, how can people find you online, take courses with you, read your books?
I do use social media. I don't have a personal website. I kind of like, that sounds like another thing to do, but I have LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Facebook sometimes a little more closed, but yeah, depending. I'll be Facebook friends with you if you'd like. But I definitely share those events on social media. The new book, I'll have a lot of forthcoming events. It's called Returning the Self to Nature: Undoing Our Collective Narcissism and Healing Our Planet. I'll be presenting in May at the National Bioneers Conference in San Francisco, and I believe some of that will be, live streamed as well. And we'll have an event at CIIS for the book on June 8th in the evening. And then folks that are interested in just taking a small course with me or learning, in the fall, I'll be teaching. CIIS has a new climate psychology kind of public, I think it's a certificate, and I'll do a full day of teaching for that program. And then I also teach, there's a ecopscyhology certificate course through the Pacifica Graduate institute that I co-teach with 3 other ecopsychology folks that happens each spring. That is a really great community if you don't want to enroll in a full program. And then if you ever want to do a PhD at CIIS, look me up. It's so funny to promote your own work and then be writing about narcissism, be like, it's really not about me. And this is like, a connection of so much wisdom, so much mentorship, and so much community. I will keep listening to your podcast, which is wonderful. And I hope more and more. I know I don't even have to hope, because it's like it's happening. We're attending. I think people just have to dig deep and stay the course and open up.
Thank you again, Jeanine, for joining us on the show. Some of my key takeaways from this episode. There's so much more to connecting with the natural world than just spending time in nature. Like our human relationships, our relationship with the planet can be an emotional one too. It's how we relate to and see ourselves as part of our surroundings, rather than separate from them. Also, never stop questioning, challenging, and rethinking your beliefs and motivations. This allows room for growth and evolution. Be okay with changing your mind. We all have so much work to do to rethink our current systems so that they protect and serve the earth and all people. The harmful ways in which we treat our planet, ourselves, and each other are all related. And by healing them together, we can create a domino effect of positive change. Another takeaway is that we can address the climate crisis and our collective mental health crisis together. Seeing them as interconnected and as byproducts of our current systems will help address them in new and innovative ways. It may sound obvious, but our worldviews shape the world we live in. Being flexible and understanding of our own fallacies and thinking can help us relate and reconnect with others. Tending and fostering relationships with those that are different from us can help heal a lot of the divisiveness and extremist beliefs that plague our modern world. And finally, reconnecting with the earth, each other, and ourselves is one of the most radical and loving acts that you can do. Hi, friends. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Urban Exodus podcast. This project is made possible by listener support. I do this work because the people I meet through this project give me hope for the future, and I think we could all use a little more motivation and inspiration in this current moment in history. All of the work that I do through this project is to encourage people to believe in themselves and to work towards a better future for their community and for our planet. Your continued support will keep this passion project running. The easiest way to contribute is to click the support button on the top of urbanexodus.com and pledge any amount that you like. Or you can buy an ad spot in an upcoming episode, shop our online store of rurally made goods, or join our Patreon community for access to bonus features, rapid-fire interviews with podcast guests, videos, live presentations, and so much more. Visit patreon.com/urbanexodus. Another way to support is by giving us a 5-star rating on iTunes and recommending Urban Exodus to your friends. Thank you again for helping me continue to do this work. I couldn't do this without all of you. You can find Urban Exodus on Instagram and Facebook at The Urban Exodus. To read more in-depth features on folks who ditched the city and went country, visit urbanexodus.com. Until next time, I'm Alyssa Hessler, and this is The Urban Exodus.